Good morning. We're going to today look at um, some information on Module 4 that you guys are working on. We're working in mating adaptations, okay? And so while we are looking at this, we want to just start with a reminder of some things that we did last week, okay? And those things were dealing with asexual and sexual reproduction in organisms. And specifically with sexual reproduction, what some of the advantages are there. Okay, and so when we look at mating rituals and adaptations for reproduction, usually we're talking about organisms that reproduce sexually. So if you recall from last week's lesson, some of the things that are good, okay, as a result of sexual reproduction is because there's two parents, you have DNA that comes from both of them. And so you get a mixture of genes. And so you get basically a 50% mix from each parent. Now, that results in greater genetic variation in the offspring, okay? Which increases, tends to increase the survival rate of the organisms. So genetic variation is a big thing. And in many species, you have two parents that will care for the offspring. It doesn't happen with every organism. In many organisms, specifically like in mammals, the male reproduces and then isn't seen or involved in the rearing of the young. But in many birds and other fish and other types of species, the male continues to care for the offspring as well. But remember, there are some disadvantages to reproducing this way. Okay, it takes a lot of energy to reproduce this way. You've got to find a partner, and because you're dealing with so many different genes, there are chances for mutations to exist and be passed on, which could be advantageous or disadvantageous to the offspring. Okay, today what we want to look at, okay, one of the disadvantages to asexual reproduction is you have to find a way to attract the opposite sex, okay? So we tend to reference these in terms of mating adaptations, okay? And so we're going to look at and just kind of put together a list of the types of behavior that we notice in the animal kingdoms, okay? So let's just take a look at this real fast. Okay, and we'll try to get this going here. Okay, so when we look at adaptations for organisms that reproduce sexually, okay, the first thing that we really notice is some animals exhibit curious behavior, okay? So for example, some of this behavior would be parental care. In humans, primates, okay, the parents, at least one of the parents, cares for the offspring until they are ready to go out on their own. So parental care of offspring, during the developmental time, okay? We see this in birds, lots of mammals, fish, and many other species, okay? The second one is appearance. When we look at lots of organisms, specifically in birds and fish, but even humans and primates, they look different. Male and females look different, okay? For example, in birds, the males tend to be much more colorful and than the females do. Okay, and so we have a variety of appearances um, between males and females. Okay, so they can attract each other. All right, now what's really interesting is in this case, in some organisms, we see some curious, it's kind of behavior on the appearance, but we see males that will pretend to be females. We see this in octopus, we see this in fish, we see this in reptile behavior, okay, where the males will pretend to be females so that they can get closer to the female, and then they'll even give off like pheromones or scent that would make them somewhat appear to be females, even though they're males. So that's kind of interesting to observe in the natural world. The third way that adaptation that we kind of use is that many organisms use is mating calls. Okay, and we see this a lot in birds. Okay, birds have a song that they use to court the opposite sex. In elk populations, they tend to like bugle and call out. Moose grunt. We see this in all kinds of things. In humans, this would be, communicating, and it used to be, oops, can't spell. We used to, males would call a female and say, nowadays it's just a text message, but used to be a little more personal, okay? Then the fourth thing that we really see happen is chemical cues, okay? And this kind of comes back to some things up here. Organisms produce a certain scent, okay, that attracts other animals, okay? This occurs in most animals, okay? Like lots of animals use this. Humans included. Humans produce pheromones of attraction. For an example, one of the things that porcupines do is the male porcupine will climb up a tree, okay, and he'll sit up in the tree, and then the female will come over and the male will pee all over the female, okay? And if the female likes the scent of his urine, then she will mate with him. If she doesn't, then she leaves. So that's kind of a really weird one, okay? And then one of the fifth and really interesting is courtship behavior, okay? Animals act a certain way to get females or males to reproduce. Okay, for example, birds, they have all these things that they do. Like you look at peacocks, they spread their big tail feathers out in an arc. Lots of birds of paradise do various dances. And spiders, male spiders will bring the female spiders prey that they have caught wrapped in spider silk, almost like it's a gift. There's a whole bunch of things in humans. We tend to, court the opposite sex. We try to take them out on a date. We dress nice. We take a shower. We do all these things to make us look good before we go on the date. In elk and deer populations, bears, walruses, they compete for breeding rights, okay? So they'll fight. So sometimes this results in fighting, or various competitions, which is kind of interesting to think about. And then a couple that maybe we haven't maybe thought about is one of the adaptations that organisms have is the number of offspring that they produce. Greatly affects the population. So like you think of like ducks. Ducks might lay, 10 eggs, right? And so all 10 of those eggs hatch and, most of those are going to survive. Okay. Whereas you look at like a grizzly bear, the offspring is 1 to 2 cubs. And it's questionable if those two are going to make it, right? And so in lots of species, you look at the number of offspring, right? Think of like insects. For example, like flies that lay eggs and their offspring grow into maggots, and we're talking about thousands and thousands, right? So, so that's really, really important to think about, okay? And then the last one is the number of gametes that are produced by a species. So a gamete, remember, is the sex cells in an organism. So you have eggs and sperm. And when we look at this, we're really mostly concerned with the eggs because sperm is always produced in high numbers. Okay, so it really is dependent on, how many eggs. But if you really think about it, it's also sperm as well, okay, because you're producing lots of sperm. And sometimes there's either a various number of eggs and you're kind of guaranteeing fertilization with lots of sperm. But like fish, for example, will lay hundreds of eggs. And all of those would get fertilized. And so the species has a very high chance of carrying on because there's so many organisms. So if we look at organisms that produce lots of eggs, like insects produce lots of eggs, hundreds of eggs. Birds tend to. Now this is species dependent, but birds are going to lay usually more than one egg, unless it's species like penguins that lay basically one egg and care for that one egg like it's, the most important thing in the world to them. Okay. But like, think of like mammals in general. Mammals tend to produce 1 to 2 eggs at a time. And so the offspring end up being 1 to 2. And so that's kind of a limiting thing. This limits the population. Whereas these things, when we look at this, I didn't want birds, I wanted fish and insects. Lots of fish, lots of insects, and these are the prey for most of birds and reptiles and amphibians. Okay, and then like if you look at like turtles, for example, they lay dozens and dozens of eggs. Okay, and so now when we look at our 7 things that result in reproduction, okay, this is a pretty good list of adaptations, and each one of these we could look into any species and find that many of these things are happening at once, right, with the animals. For example, if we look at birds show that at least one of the parents is going to care for that offspring. They look different. They have mating calls like a song. They're probably producing some kind of chemical scent prior to mating. Many bird species have courtship rituals that they use, and then they lay, more than 2 or 3 eggs. They lay a lot of eggs, and so they produce lots of eggs, right? So birds use all of these things. Humans, let's look at humans. Humans, we care for our young, right? Humans focus on their appearance when trying to court and find a mate. We tend to communicate or try to communicate positively with the person we want to court and be with. Humans produce scent, okay? We tend to court our person that we're trying to be with. We produce a limited number of offspring, usually one. Sometimes you have twins, and then females produce 1 egg a month, right? And males produce thousands and thousands of sperm. And so, in this case, because females produce 1 egg a month, you have a chance every month to breed. Okay. One of the disadvantages to this whole thing is some organisms, the window of reproduction is very, very small. So if you miss the window during that year, you missed it altogether. Okay. So that's kind of a disadvantage of these types of things. Okay. So your prompt for today, like, what do I want you to do? Okay. In looking at these 7 things, okay, I just want you to pick one of these things and kind of elaborate on it. You may have to look it up a little bit and maybe find some examples, but I want you to choose one of these adaptations, okay, and then explain why you think this one is interesting. Interesting to you. Okay. Now that could be submitting a picture with an explanation. You could find me a web link and submit the link for me to go to. You could find a YouTube video that you watch and submit me that link. Okay, so one of these 3 things I want you to do to show that you kind of investigated this further. So kind of the idea would be choose an organism that you really like to learn about. Okay, it could be any organism. And then choose one of these things and try to find something that it does. Send me a picture, a web link, or a YouTube video link to demonstrate that you've investigated this a little further. Okay, that is our lesson for today. Okay, we're at midterm. Okay, so if you're behind in any way, you've got plenty of time to get things caught up and going. If you need help, always reach out. Okay, I'm more than happy to help you and see that you're able to find success. Okay, and hopefully you're doing well in the course. If you're ever get stuck on an assignment, you're not sure what to do, email me and I can get back to you. If you have ideas for things you want to learn about during these little mini lessons, make sure to email me and I can get you some information. Okay, you guys take care and have a great rest of the week.